for those that can make it, heads up. All right, we're going to move on, and we're going to take, we're going to hear from REI, one of the most, really the most, what's the word, persistent companies focused on inclusion in the industry, if not by far the most down the path. So, Ladan, you're here? Yes.
Hi.
Take it away, Ladan.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Kenji, for inviting us. And thank you to all the speakers. Ooh, that light is bright. I just have to start by saying it's a true honor and privilege to be in a room with so many people who are doing and have been doing this kind of work for so long. So thank you for including us, and my name is Ladan Yalzadeh, and I'm the manager for a particular project that REI is supporting that is a part of a larger, much larger body of work. The project itself is called Race and Place, and I'll get a little bit more into it. I wanted to pick up on something that you said, James, in terms of thank you so much for just breaking down the demographics and how this country by 2045 will be majority non-white. And it's so important to include the voices and the representations of these communities in the conversation. I myself am Iranian American. I was an immigrant here. I immigrated here when I was 16, and you can imagine the representations of an Iranian in current day America. So I have a personal connection to this work. And what we discovered was that majority of diverse communities ultimately don't feel safe or welcome in the outdoors for many, many reasons, many of which you are already familiar with, so we won't get too deeply into that. However, what we realized was that the outdoor industry players, if you will, including REI, some of the large industry movers and shakers, were not necessarily for a very long time helping the situation. And part of it is because, you know, for example, REI was started by a white couple, and they pretty much recruited their friends, and so it just was the cultural norms of them and their friends, and many of the outdoor industry was basically sort of following the same suit. However, when we started to really look at how we could change the norms, what we realized was that there was both internal work that we had to do at REI, and this is long before my arrival at REI, as well as really the work that we were doing customer-facing. And I just wanted to share this slide because this is really our North Star here with our For All agenda, which is the DEI work that REI is committed to. And it starts with the belief that REI, we believe that a life outdoors is a life well lived. And that is true for all. And so what we discovered was that we had to very systematically and strategically address all of the different work streams that we had at REI in order to really be able to then speak to our commitment to the DEI work when it came to our customers. So my brilliant colleague here, Nicole Browning, can tell you all about this. This is her creation, and she is totally from top down in the weeds with it. So we can, hit Nicole up later about this slide. However, this is sort of like a manifestation, just a little bit of a taste and a manifestation of what REI's then customer-facing projects have been. We support a plethora of nonprofit partners, some of whom are here, and I'll do a shout out in just a moment, by supporting them both financially and also in kind, but also we internally have launched major campaigns, for example, Force of Nature, which many of you are familiar from a few years back, where all of REI's efforts was put in that direction of really highlighting women in the outdoors, to supporting LGBTQ events, and we have a large storytelling channel called Co-op Journal, and through that channel we tell a lot of stories, and many of those stories have also been covering the DEI. So, Race and Place. This project in earnest started in 2017 in two phases. And it kind of worked in reverse, actually. What we wanted to do was to really address in two ways the idea of communities of color and how they were reclaiming and redefining the outdoors. What we realized was that REI didn't necessarily have the expertise. So we worked with the Atlantic and basically asked some of our greatest partners, which Kenji, if you can forward that slide, that'd be great, which is on the next slide. Thank you. These are our partners that we basically brought together as a think tank, and we all began to ask the question of what was the barrier to entry for communities of color and diverse communities. So these are some of the faces you'll recognize. I just saw our dear, dear friend and current advisory board member, Jose Gonzalez here. Jose, are you in the room?
Yeah, Jose.
Yeah! And I also ran into Len Nessifer a little bit earlier, and so, oh, great. And Perry's here. Where you at, Perry? Oh, great. So we brought people from a very, very sort of diverse connection to the outdoors, right? Some of them were academics, some of them were government officials, people who just love the outdoors, people who were founders of affinity groups in the outdoors. And we encouraged them to ask the question of what was the barrier to entry for folks. And they identified some of those and also then put together a very, very pragmatic, wonderful set of action steps, if you will. And if you just Google REI and The Atlantic, it was published in 2018. It's still online, and you will see the full result of that project. So, if we can advance, thank you. So that basically led us to what ultimately is the most powerful medium we have, which is the medium of storytelling. My background is in film. I'm a producer, but I'm also a socially engaged artist for many, many years. So I've worked with many diverse communities to bring together their stories in different forms. And part of what we wanted to do was to bring together a diverse group of folks at very specific locations through long discussions and guidance by our advisory board. Kenji, if you don't mind. Thank you. So this advisory board, some of whom had carried on from the Atlantic project, we basically took their lead in a year-long process of really talking about what regions to focus on, what were some of the topics at hand, and really following their guidance. And some of them are remaining as our partners as the project comes into fruition, hopefully later in the fall. So, and again, some of the, folks that were working on it before. And what we decided was that we were going to have what we're calling trail chats. So there will be people, again, from a very diverse background in terms of their professions, their race, ethnicity, gender, all of that. But that they would be stakeholders within each one of these locations who could talk about their connection to the land and really discuss the location in a very complex and nuanced way. One of the things that we are discovering, again, with the guidance of our advisory board, is that there is a lot of complexity to these stories, that many of us have connections to the land that sometimes overlap and sometimes actually can appear to be in conflict with one another. But that what's important is for us to really show that we can all be in conversation with one another, even if we are sometimes seeing things not completely eye to eye. And this is part of what's so exciting about this project, is that bridging, or kind of dissolving this thing that's happening in this country in terms of us versus them, and this very sort of, divided country that we're living in. Anyway, so we worked with our, luminaries and our advisory council. We have 4 places. The participants will be invited to come to literally what is called a trail chat. So we will have outside locations where we take a stroll down the trail or go to some key locations and have a conversation, informal conversation that's about this location and all the different topics that might come up in terms of the significance of it. No, that's perfect. Thank you. The 4 locations that the advisory board deemed as good places to start, and again, this is a starting point, is the Tule Lake National Monument in California, the site of the largest Japanese American internment concentration camp in the country, but also a native land to the Modoc tribe of Oklahoma, who were displaced in the 1800s when they lost the war there, to current local farmers, and it's an economically depressed region in the very, very northern border of California, and a very significant one because it's actually the largest bird migration path in the United States. So many, many stakeholders and many, many interesting topics to discuss. The second location is the border region of El Paso and Juarez, and this region was selected because we wanted to showcase how one community on 2 sides of the border had a very symbiotic and fluid community, and there is a 10K race that happens there, sponsored by the El Paso Community Foundation, and we're very excited to showcase that. The third region was the African Meeting House in Boston, and what's really unique is that that's the oldest, as many of you know, Black church north of the Mason-Dixon line, and it was an absolute hub for folks who went through the Freedom Trail and finally made it to the north, and then of course there was no support or there was no spaces for them to really be free and among one another. So, and what's unique about this is that it's actually an urban trail that we're covering, and that's one of the things that REI is also discovering, is that we kind of need to redefine what we mean by the outdoors, that not everybody is a mountain climber, and not everybody is a adventure sports person and can travel 100 miles from their home to go get outside. That maybe the nearby park might be their version of the outdoors, or an urban trail around the neighborhood. And then the last one is Bears Ears National Monument, which for many of us, it's very significant what's happened in the last few years. But what's also significant, and again with the brilliant guidance of our board and Len, is to really kind of focus on the coalitions that have developed there between not just the sovereign nations, the tribal nations there, but also between the nations and the climbing community, and how it's expanded the understanding and the respect of both communities that have typically been at odds with each other. Oh, well, I guess that's the end. So just very quickly, thank you so much for coming. I think that probably the slide that I skipped is that, hoping, it's really, this is a multidisciplinary project that we are, inviting artists and storytellers and essayists and journalists, and so hopefully it will be multidimensional, and it's, here are some examples, and one of the inspirations that Nicole and I continue to go back to is the 1619 project, because of its breadth and how contemporary and cohesive and beautifully put together it was. So that's sort of, and here are some other examples of it. So stay tuned, and if you have questions, I'm definitely available after. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Ladan. All right, moving right along. Thanks for sticking around. I know we're running a little bit late. We are turning the mic.